Now, following consultation with members, the National Taxi Council, Santaco, has resolved to call off its 8-day stay away. Now, this comes after an urgent meeting with officials of the Western Cape government and the city of Cape Town. At the same time, Cosatu had weighed in on the taxi strike, urging for urgent intervention. The Trade Union Federation wrote letters to the CCMA Ministers of Police and Transport and the Western Cape Premier and to the Mayor of Cape Town. For more on this request for urgent intervention, we're joined by Cosatu Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks. Matthew, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
And I guess let's start maybe with, I would say, the latest good news, if I can call it that, in that the strike has been called off. Your reflection on that?
No, it's very positive. Literally, it is breaking news, as you're saying, that Santaco has announced literally a few minutes ago that the strike is off. They've come to agreement with the city of Cape Town and with the provincial government of the Western Cape. I think also helped facilitate by the national government too. So I think it's very positive they called off the strike, that taxis will be back on the road in Cape Town and across the Western Cape tomorrow, so workers can go back to work safely, learners and students can go back to their schools and universities safely from tomorrow. I think part of the agreement is a 14-day process further between Santaco and the city of Cape Town around those taxis which had been impounded. So that's a positive thing because we've seen a real tragedy across Cape Town over the past week with 5 lives lost for no reason whatsoever, with many people having been injured and shot, including bus drivers and so forth. We've seen traffic officers also being assaulted. We've seen many workers really plunge into a crisis because they couldn't get to work. And of course, even taxi drivers themselves were in a real difficult spot because if they don't work, they don't get paid. But I think we do appreciate that the engagements have been successful. Our Cosatu Provincial Secretary has been part of the engagements with the National Ministers of Police and Transport, with the Premier and the MEC for Transport in the Western Cape and the Mayor and his MACO team in the city of Cape Town. And of course, the leadership of Santaco. So that's very positive. I think our stance of Cosatu has been since last week that there are legitimate issues on all sides of the parties. They need to be resolved, and the only way you can resolve that is by talking to each other. You don't have to be friends, but you have to negotiate. We hope this is going to lay a foundation for a broader discussion about what needs to be done to transform the taxi industry, because really it is the backbone of public transport. It is the backbone of the economy. It is one of the few African and colored-led industries. Gets very little support from government, but we also need to accept that all of us have an obligation to abide by the rule of the law, and we have to respect everybody else's rights at the same time as well.
From your vantage point, Matthew, I mean, why do you think this impasse, this standoff, took this long to an extent where lives were lost? What was the disconnect, at least from your vantage point?
So look, I think there's many issues. Look, the taxi industry, especially in Cape Town, but I think across the country, has these sporadic outbreaks of violence. We've had taxi wars in Cape Town for many, many decades. So there is an issue there that needs to be fundamentally addressed. I think what sparked the latest issues was when the city of Cape Town impounded many taxi vehicles. In instances that the taxi industry felt were not legitimate. I think the taxi industry has said they accept the need to impound vehicles if they're not licensed, or if the driver himself doesn't have a passenger driver's permit, if the driver's drunk, for example, or if the taxi is not roadworthy. I think where there was a dispute with the city and the taxi industry was around the impounding of vehicles for what was seen as minor traffic offences like speeding tickets and other traffic violations. So I think that's what sparked the issue. And of course, if you impound a large amount of taxis, like I think it's about 6,000, quite a significant amount if I'm right, that of course sparked the violence. I think, one appreciates the need of the city to protect commuters, to enforce the law. And one can't just dispute that. That's what they must do. But I think the city may not have thought this thing through properly, and of course didn't put in place contingency plans, as is very clear, I think, to all parties, including the city. We appreciate the need for the taxi industry to make money like any other industry, to pay their staff and so on. But they also need to find a way to resolve issues. I think for us as Cosatu, we welcome the resolution now, and I think we appreciate all parties have engaged in good faith and found each other across the board. What we need now is a national discussion about formalizing the taxi industry. It is one of the few black-led industries which has made it through apartheid, has survived with very little support. Other transport sectors like buses and trains and planes all get significant subsidies from the state. We should provide the similar subsidies for the taxi industry because really it is the foundation for a public transport system. All townships, any rural town, will have taxis providing the transport linkage to it. But then there needs to be a quid pro quo. The taxi industry has to recognize the rights of taxi drivers and other taxi workers to abide by all the labor laws for them, from minimum wage to overtime, to limits on how many hours they can work, to health and safety issues, unemployment insurance, compensation injury on duty insurance, all that. So all the labor rights of taxi drivers need to be respected by the owners. The owners need to pay them a set living wage. Because right now the crisis is that the owners demand that taxi drivers provide them a certain amount of cash every day. After that, the leftover money can go to the drivers. This is what forces the drivers to behave as if this is some sort of Grand Prix race, and to break also the traffic laws and put everybody, including the passengers' lives and other commuters' lives, in serious risk. So we need to have that discussion, because as long as you continue to exploit taxi drivers and treat them like glorified slaves, we're going to have this crisis. And it's going to erupt time and again, not just in Cape Town, but in Gauteng, across the country. So we need to formulate. We need to recognize the role it plays. It plays a fantastic role, huge role, but there has to be a conversation. Let's government give support. Let's recognize the taxi and affirm the industry. But in exchange, let's formalize it and make sure they comply with all the labor laws, the tax laws, the traffic laws. And then really we can have a positive relationship going forward. But no one should have to experience what we had in Cape Town for the past week again. It should surely be a wake-up call for government, for industry, for society.
Would you say this is a governance or government problem, in that, as you say, that there's been lots of talks over the years about formalizing the taxi industry? And I mean, as you say, this is an industry that has survived apartheid. A lot of black people depend on this either as a business for their livelihood, but also for daily commute. Is this a government issue that government is not necessarily... And again, Matthew, lack of a better phrasing, taking this matter serious?
Yeah. Look, I think many stakeholders have got different responsibilities, but yes, ultimately, we think the buck does stop with national government in terms of the one which sets the national legislation framework and also which has some resources they can give. We don't think it's unreasonable for government to say, what can we do to support the taxi industry? It is the pillar of our public transport system. It has a much greater impact than trains and buses and etc. We should be really saying, how can we move people from private cars to taxis? But you can't do that if they don't behave. So government needs to do it. It's had over the last 6 administrations, different starts and stops. But look, I mean, that's water under the bridge. Let's use this crisis as an opportunity. Let's not allow the crisis to go to waste. Let's have this national discussion. We've been raising it as Cosatu for many, many years too. Raised it, in fact, during 2020 when the previous Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, had said, let's give some relief for COVID-19 to taxis. So it's fine. There's a lot of blame to go around, from national to provincial to local government to the industry itself. But let's look at a common solution, because there's enough that we can all agree upon. We can all agree upon the taxi industry is a critical strategic industry. It's African and colored-led. We must give us support. In exchange, there must be a coming to the party from the industry too, around drivers' rights, around commuter rights, and around just a simple respect for the tax laws and for the laws of the Republic. I don't think it should be too difficult. But what is clear is that you can't afford a standoff like this, because right now the standoff in Cape Town have brought the economy to a collapse and made it impossible for workers to go to work and earn their salary. The industry of taxis was bleeding. And of course, the city and the provincial government too are bleeding. So a crisis can be a good thing. Let's exploit that crisis and let's see if we can't finally once and for all address what is really, to be honest, not a complicated matter, but it requires some leadership and will from all parties.
How much of a role then, Matthew, would you say the taxi industry itself plays in this? And the reason I'm asking that is that depending on who you ask, people will say the taxi industry is a law unto itself, and whether they are willing to be to have a formal structure that will be controlled, because the perception, whether true or not, is that this is an industry that is dirty, that is a law unto itself, and if you try and formalize it, you're going to expose a lot of shenanigans that are going on within the industry. Do you feel that the taxi industry itself is ready and willing to be formalized, as it were?
We think so. We think the majority of taxi owners, of taxi drivers, are normal South Africans who, as you said, simply want to earn a salary to take care of their families. This is a business, but we need to regulate it. And that can help us to weed out the criminal and the unruly elements, and those must go to jail. But we think the majority of owners and drivers are simple, decent South Africans who just want to have a decent life. Of course, we must tighten the laws, and those who transgress them must be dealt with. We must protect our police officers or traffic officers who also themselves are simply earning a salary to take care of their families and want to play their role in creating a peaceful environment for all pedestrians and commuters and South Africans. But we think also let's have a bit of a smart approach. So we have tight laws, tight enforcement, but let's also offer subsidies to the taxi industry because that is the only fair thing to do. We subsidize the bus industry because it provides a public good to transport commuters, to get people out of cars. We subsidize trains for the very same strategic economic purpose. So surely we can subsidize the taxi industry too, which provides even greater public good than trains and buses do combined. And of course, it has to be a quid pro quo. We can't have public servants working in the Department of Transport who, if they don't issue a permit to a taxi, get threatened with intimidation and violence, etc. So there has to be a quid pro quo. We can subsidize the taxi industry. We think government should do that. We appreciate the government fiscus is extremely tight right now, but this must be a longer discussion. But in exchange, those who misbehave must be dealt with. So if you can link the subsidies to your traffic violations, for example, that if you found to have so many speeding tickets or other traffic violations, perhaps you could be a penalty of not getting a subsidy for a month. That could be a powerful way to change the culture, because what's clear right now is that if traffic officers simply issue tickets to the drivers, they just get thrown out the window as soon as the driver takes off. So it's not really resolving. I think that's part of what frustrated the city to go to extremes of just simply impounding thousands of taxis, which didn't help matters. They put kerosene on the fire. So it's up to us, collectively, as government, as the industry, as labor, etc. Let's have the discussion, let's resolve it. The laws are there. It's not complicated to simply say, let's abide by them. Let's have a carrot and stick approach. If you do well, you get rewarded. If you don't do well, then there must be some punishment going forward. And I think that can benefit everybody, including the majority of taxi owners and drivers who really just want to earn a living and take care of the family.
As we wind up the conversation, Matthew, I know that as Cosatu had written to the CCMA, the Minister of Police, the Premier, and all the parties involved, now that the strike has been called off, and what's your expectation in the next 14 days to make sure that we don't go back to what we've seen and we learn from this so that we don't lose any lives and livelihoods, as it were?
Yeah. So I think the step one is that what Santaco has done now in the last few minutes is to announce the strike is over, for them to communicate to the drivers that it's back to work tomorrow. Of course, the public is still a little bit fearful across the Cape Flats, but hopefully many will go back to work tomorrow. I suspect many will also just stay at home tomorrow out of fear, just check what's happening. Of course, it's late at night. Of course, the Santaco said that they've got a 14-day agreement with the City of Cape Town to resolve the impounding issue for those remaining taxi vehicles. We hope, and our provincial secretary will be engaged in that process to make sure it does happen, that the issues are resolved amicably. We are confident that there has been significant progress between the city and Santaco with the support of the national and provincial governments. But then let's not allow this to just simply dissipate and wait another 2 years where we can all stumble into the next crisis. Let's seize the opportunity. This has been a very long discussion, I think we can recall, for more than 3 decades plus in the city of Cape Town, for example. Let's really exploit this opportunity and see if we can't finally, once and for all, crack this shell, because we can't simply continue. We can't have another 5 lives be lost in the next taxi crisis. So I think many of us would know people who have been shot, who have been paralyzed, who have died in this needless violence over many, many years. And really, we are a modern democracy. We should not be behaving like some sort of cowboy movie. We really need to kind of take responsibility and collectively, as government, as business, as labor, let's find a win-win solution which respects the Constitution and everybody's human and fundamental rights.
Matthew Parks, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Appreciate your time. That is Matthew Parks of Cosatu. And of course, the breaking news is that Santaco has called off that taxi strike.